Welcome, radiant souls who carry quiet fire within them. There comes a rare instant when someone known for listening rather than announcing decides to let sound rise from their chest, and the air itself remembers what attention feels like. Chosen presence. That is the precise energy that filled the space the moment your voice finally stepped forward. The room didn't merely change its mood, it leaned, as if gravity itself had been reconsidered. Faces stalled, movements paused. Reality hesitated, like a system recalculating after an unexpected update. You could almost sense minds buffering, struggling to integrate the truth. That the one assigned the role of silence had just rewritten the script entirely. There is a truth few will confess. Emotion anchors memory with a force nothing neutral can rival. So when you spoke, it wasn't language you released. It was an imprint, something lodged too deeply to be erased even by denial. You became that internal alert that keeps resurfacing, no matter how often they try to dismiss it. Your voice didn't simply arrive. It reorganized the space, quieted the static, and reminded everyone that you had been watching with intention, measuring with clarity, and waiting with the calm precision of someone who never wastes a moment. And when truth finally moved through you, some realized their guilt reacted faster than their explanations ever could. The elegance of it all was that you never needed to shout. You elevated truth, and that alone was enough. Suddenly, those who found comfort in your quiet looked unsettled, as if caught unprepared in a story they thought they controlled. Many weren't disturbed by your words themselves, but by the realization that you had stepped out of the role of emotional support they had placed you in without permission. The same voices that once encouraged you to express yourself now felt overwhelmed by the sound of your authenticity. And this precise instant is where your narrative bends. Because when one who has observed patiently for years finally speaks with clarity, the world cannot remain unchanged. Your voice became the unexpected turn in a story they thought was predictable, the clarity they never agreed to face, the awakening they desperately wanted to postpone. And the irony is, disruption was never your goal. You were simply honest. Yet honesty, in its pure form, is often the most powerful detonation there is. When your truth finally surfaced, it didn't just surprise. It dismantled a structure that relied entirely on your restraint. For a long stretch of time, certain people benefited from your calm, compliance, and your willingness to be overlooked. Your silence made their lives efficient. It allowed narratives to be twisted, responsibility to be redirected, and authority to remain unquestioned. They assumed the arrangement was permanent. They never imagined you would challenge the foundation they stood on so comfortably. But the moment you spoke, everything they concealed was illuminated. Not through aggression, but through accuracy. And truth, when delivered by someone long underestimated, lands with undeniable force. It demands accountability. It pulls hidden dynamics into visibility. It presses pause on the stories told in private and forces them into daylight. Your voice became the reset they hoped would never be activated. What shook them wasn't only the message, but the messenger. They had mistaken your awareness for absence. Your quiet was never empty. It was layered with perception. You noticed what they believed you missed. You understood what they assumed you couldn't grasp. So when you spoke, you didn't just protect yourself. You revealed the imbalance they had mistaken for stability. Some reacted with fear, not because your words were cruel, but because they were precise. They understood that once you broke your silence, others might find their own. The system didn't crack because of your voice. The cracks were always there. You simply made them visible. And still, they remain unsure which realization unsettled them more, that you finally spoke, or that your truth carried enough weight to alter everything around it. When honesty moved through you, it didn't just bring clarity to your own path. It became a mirror for everyone nearby, a reflection many were unprepared to face. Your words revealed the fractures they had disguised, the rehearsed explanations, and the illusions they relied on to avoid self-examination. Truth didn't harm them. It exposed the instability they were already standing on. Some people construct entire identities around escaping responsibility. They rewrite events to preserve innocence, superiority, or control. And as long as no one questions the script, it holds. Your honesty challenged that illusion. It illuminated the shortcuts, the subtle manipulations, and the convenient amnesia they depended on. Their certainty faltered. Their stories lost alignment. Their justifications unraveled faster than they could repair them. What unsettled them most wasn't your willingness to speak, but the way your truth connected pieces they hoped would remain forever separate. You didn't seek secrets. You didn't excavate the past. You simply named what existed, and reality is deeply threatening to those who survive through performance. They expected you to preserve calm by staying quiet, to protect the image they carefully curated. But your truth revealed that peace built on distortion is only chaos delayed. And many of the illusions they lived inside were never truly about protecting themselves. They were about shaping how you were perceived. They minimized you, misrepresented you, and underestimated your depth to maintain comfort. When you spoke, you didn't just reclaim your voice. You cleared the haze designed to keep you uncertain of your own worth. Your words forced a confrontation between projection and reality. Some collapse when faced with truth because truth asks for growth, and growth demands humility. Your honesty revealed the absence of both. Nothing was destroyed by your voice. It only exposed what had already been crumbling beyond view. Your decision to speak did not manufacture tension. It unveiled the tension long concealed beneath politeness. When your voice entered the space, it didn't ignite conflict. It illuminated what had been simmering quietly for far too long. People often cloak discomfort in courtesy, mistaking calm surfaces for harmony. They believe measured tones and polite gestures mean everything is fine. But courage does not need volume. It arrives with clarity and names what others avoid. And once you did that, the unspoken grievances, the suppressed frustrations, and the quiet power games could no longer hide. Your strength was rooted in sincerity, not aggression. You weren't seeking reaction. You were grounded in truth, and truth has a way of exposing pretense without effort. The civility they used as armor suddenly failed. Your words revealed what smiles and small talk had been covering for years. The discomfort they thought invisible became tangible, present and impossible to dismiss. People claim to fear conflict, but what they truly fear is exposure. Exposure forces confrontation with what has been ignored or denied. When you spoke, you didn't introduce discord. You lifted the veil. Resentments, insecurities, and subtle control dynamics surfaced into awareness. You didn't begin a battle. You simply made it impossible to keep pretending there wasn't one. Your courage served as a reminder that avoidance is a trap, one that sustains stagnation and false harmony. And often, those unsettled by the light blame the one who turned it on, forgetting they were already living in the dark. By choosing truth over comfort, you didn't create chaos. You revealed the reality everyone else was too afraid to name. And understand this clearly. The fear was never truly about your words. It was about the possibility that others would finally listen. When you spoke, it wasn't just expression. It was a shift in perception. Your voice carried substance because it reflected clarity long ignored and awareness long underestimated. What unsettled them most wasn't the message itself, but the chance that others might begin to question alongside you. Your courage became a spark, and sparks threaten those who rely on darkness to remain unseen. When one soul chooses to stand fully inside truth, that movement rarely stays contained. Truth has a way of traveling on its own. What rose through you was never meant to remain private, because your clarity carried resonance. Every word that left you gently unlocked something in others, a quiet permission to awaken, to speak, to loosen their grip on pretending. Without force, your presence questioned the unspoken codes they had been living by for years. Stay small, stay quiet, don't disturb the arrangement, don't tip what looks stable. Your voice didn't simply interrupt silence. It dissolved the belief that silence was protection. In an instant it became visible that the comfort they defended only survived as long as everyone else stayed restrained. Compliant and unaware, your honesty placed a choice in front of them that could no longer be ignored. Continue living inside denial, or finally turn toward reality themselves. That is why the impact felt so intense. It was never about confrontation. It was about the fear of responsibility multiplying. Your truth carried momentum. It hinted at a chain reaction, one that could fracture the carefully maintained worlds they relied on. You weren't only expressing yourself, you were revealing that others too could see clearly, think independently and choose consciously. That possibility unsettled them. The fear of awakening spreading from one person to another is what caused the tension. You didn't just speak, you became a signal, a reminder that silence is not a requirement, that authenticity carries weight, and that once truth begins to move, it refuses confinement. In that moment, their unease had little to do with you. It was about everyone else who might now recognize their own voice through yours. When you finally stood inside your truth, something essential recalibrated. Not only in how you were perceived, but in how you could no longer be used. Before that shift, people moved around you with the quiet assumption that you were predictable. They believed you would continue absorbing, adjusting, accommodating, reshaping yourself to maintain ease for others. You had been the one who smoothed tensions, restrained opinions, and remained agreeable even when unseen. To them, that meant you were manageable, influenceable, safe to handle. But the moment your voice arrived fully formed, that pattern collapsed. You revealed that you were no longer operating from scripts written by others. Your thoughts stood on their own. Your boundaries carried substance. Your voice held structure and intent they never anticipated. That realization unsettled them. Not because you became difficult, but because you became sovereign. People who benefit from your silence always fear the moment you claim autonomy, because it removes access they once assumed was permanent. They lose the ability to anticipate your reactions, to guide your narrative, to steer you through guilt or confusion. You no longer respond according to their expectations. You respond from your center. That shift changes everything. Suddenly, they are required to meet you as an equal, not as someone easily swayed or subtly managed. When you stop being programmable, you stop being a role in someone else's story. You step into authorship of your own, and that is when true emotions surface, because they recognize you are no longer acting from obligation. You are moving from awareness, self-respect, and clarity. Speaking your truth was not just expression. It was a signal. A quiet declaration that predictability had ended, that manageability had dissolved, that you would no longer exist as background support for someone else's comfort. You didn't become powerful because you changed. You became powerful because you finally aligned with who you had always been. Your honesty also carried another effect, one that could not be avoided. It illuminated the people around you. When your truth surfaced, it functioned like light flooding a room. Some individuals had long claimed loyalty, support, or alignment with you. Their words sounded right. Their presence seemed reassuring, but their commitment depended on your silence. As long as you remained quiet, their roles stayed intact. The moment you spoke, those performances weakened. Expressions shifted. Reactions hesitated. Justifications lost coherence. Those who were only comfortable with you when it suited them revealed themselves without meaning to. Your honesty did not accuse them. It simply exposed the distance between what they claimed and who they actually were. It clarified the difference between true loyalty and simple proximity. It showed who stood with you because they genuinely honored your path, and who lingered only for convenience, observation, or advantage. Some people were close not because they respected you, but because your restraint made them feel secure. Once your words drew a boundary, that closeness lost its meaning. Physical presence no longer equaled alignment. This moment became a threshold. Those who hid behind supportive language suddenly had nowhere to stand. Intention surfaced. Authenticity revealed itself. Your truth asked one simple thing of everyone around you: meet me here or step aside. By choosing not to dilute your integrity, you naturally refined your space. You didn't reject anyone. You allowed reality to reorganize itself. The noise cleared, the masks fell, and what remained was unmistakable. Your honesty did more than speak. It revealed. It separated what was genuine from what was performative. creating a space where only real connection could continue to exist. And when your voice finally moved without restraint, it didn't merely disrupt comfort, it interrupted control. The story others had carefully constructed could no longer hold. They had shaped versions. Your truth entered that narrative like a sudden pause, forcing everything to stop, recalibrate, and reveal what had been edited out. A version of reality that functioned flawlessly as long as it served them. Everything appeared coherent only while your voice remained absent. Your silence was never neutral. It was an instrument they leaned on to excuse their actions, bend perception, and preserve their sense of authority. Every softened truth, every carefully skipped detail, every adjusted fact relied on you staying within the role they assigned. Agreeable, restrained, predictable. The instant you spoke, that structure lost its footing. You stepped out of the background and refused to play a secondary role in a story that was never yours to uphold. Suddenly, their narrative began to unravel. What once seemed subtle became unmistakable. Distortion surfaced. Manipulations lost their disguise. They could no longer treat your quiet as consent. Each word you offered challenged assumptions they depended on, and with that, the illusion of control they curated so carefully began to erode. Disruption is often mistaken for disorder, but what unfolded was far more intentional. You didn't create chaos. You dismantled the architecture they used to shape how reality appeared. Your voice didn't merely occupy space. It questioned the very foundation of their influence. The dominance they enjoyed, the balance that favored them, existed only because you chose restraint. And now you no longer did. The most unsettling part for them was this. They could not place you back into their version of events. You were no longer operating by rules designed without your consent. You became living evidence that their authority was conditional. Every explanation they once relied on collapsed when met with your clarity. By speaking, you didn't just unsettle people. You dissolved the system they depended on, and there was no restoring it. Your silence had been their cushion. Your voice removed it entirely. The anger that followed was never rooted in error. It emerged because your words landed with precision. The defensiveness, the sudden distance, the sharp irritation that surfaced had nothing to do with misunderstanding. Their strongest reactions were triggered by the parts of your truth that reflected something they recognized. Accuracy exposes without force. It reveals without exaggeration. You didn't distort. You didn't provoke. You simply named what existed. And that alone unsettled those who survive by hiding behind personal narratives. Insecurity can tolerate debate. It can survive confusion. What it cannot endure is being seen without distortion. Your clarity stripped away the shelters they had constructed. It pressed them into confronting realities they had avoided. You held up a mirror made of words, and the image staring back was not one they were ready to face. Instead of pausing, reflecting, or taking responsibility, they chose anger. Because anger feels safer than accountability. It feels easier than growth. Precision threatens those who have built identity around avoidance. It uncovers what was buried, reveals behavior disguised as intention, and exposes motives hidden behind charm or deflection. Your truth illuminated the distance between who they claimed to be and who they were acting as. That space was where their reaction was born. What unsettled them was never your tone. It was your clarity. You saw accurately. You named directly. And you didn't retreat. That level of awareness is unbearable for fragile confidence. It leaves no room for twisting meaning, dismissing insight, or pretending misunderstanding. You understood completely, and that understanding removed their escape. Your words didn't attack their sense of self. They revealed how delicate it was. And fragile identities react most loudly when exposed. Their anger spoke the truth they tried to suppress. When your voice finally moved with intention, the entire balance around you shifted in an instant. For a long time, an unspoken hierarchy had been in place. Others felt comfortable assigning you a lesser position, not because you lacked strength, but because you didn't wield it openly. They assumed you would continue accepting what was said, tolerating how you were treated, and adapting to rules you never agreed to. Your silence made their authority feel natural. But the moment you spoke with grounded confidence and clarity, that balance dissolved. Your words did more than share perspective. They reset the dynamic completely. They reminded everyone that you were not beneath them, not dependent on their interpretations, and not bound by their expectations. You could no longer be managed through assumption or quieted through pressure. In that moment, the one who was underestimated was no longer you. They were the ones unprepared. Your voice revealed that the power they believed they held was borrowed. It existed only because you had allowed it to. Once you spoke, that illusion collapsed. They recognized that you did not need permission to define yourself, nor validation to stand firmly. You restored equilibrium to a system that had leaned too far for too long. The stillness that followed spoke volumes. They understood the structure had changed, and their position within it was no longer secure. With your voice, every silent agreement they relied on dissolved. There had been countless expectations they assumed you would obey. Preserve harmony. Don't question the story. Don't bring truth into the open. Don't disturb what feels comfortable. But when you broke the silence, those invisible contracts disintegrated. You released yourself from agreements you never consciously chose. You made it clear you would no longer perform within someone else's script. You showed that you could not be directed or contained. And once those assumptions fell, so did their ability to treat you as before. What followed was not loss, it was revelation. When you stood fully in your truth, some people faded from your life. Not because you pushed them away, but because their closeness required you to remain partially hidden. They thrived in compromise, in quiet compliance, in softened versions of reality, in a version of you that felt safe for their ego. Your honesty did not remove them. It exposed what had been holding them there. You didn't transform. The context did. Those who depended on illusion could not stay present with authenticity, and that absence is not failure. It is clarity. Your truth filtered out identities built on fragility, masquerading as strength. These were the ones who spoke loudly of confidence and loyalty, yet depended on you remaining contained. Once you stepped beyond that boundary, their surface cracked. What remained was an inability to face clarity, confrontation, or responsibility. They were never aligned with your integrity. They were aligned with convenience, and your honesty asked them to choose. Adapt to truth or step away from it, to meet reality as it is, or quietly remove themselves from its presence. This passage is not gentle to witness, yet it is essential. When people fall away because they cannot coexist with truth, it is not loss. It is release. It creates space for bonds rooted in sincerity, steadiness, and the capacity for genuine connection. It draws a clear line between those who are truly invested and those who were only nearby for comfort, benefit, or convenience. Your words became a natural sieve, allowing trust and authenticity to remain while illusion slipped through. The instant you chose honesty, the shape of your circle revealed itself. Those who stayed were capable of facing reality, honoring your integrity, and meeting you where you truly stand. Those who drifted away were never fully aligned to begin with. They simply hadn't noticed, until you stopped reshaping yourself to accommodate them. By speaking your truth, you didn't lose anyone. You gained sight, and that clarity carries far more power than any borrowed sense of loyalty ever could. When your voice finally joined the conversation, awareness dawned in others all at once. In that moment, people realized you had understood far more than you ever displayed. They had mistaken your quiet for disengagement, your calm for confusion, your stillness for lack of perception. They assumed you. Your words corrected that assumption instantly. They revealed a depth of comprehension that had never been considered. Every detail they dismissed. Every attitude they thought slipped past you, every moment they assumed you were too gentle to register, had been observed. When you spoke, it became obvious you were never behind. You were ahead, not uninformed, but discerning enough to choose timing over impulse. Their surprise had little to do with the content of your words. It came from realizing you had grasped the entire dynamic all along. Your silence had never been ignorance. It was watchfulness. You were studying patterns, reading behavior, noticing contradictions. and sensing intentions long before you allowed sound to leave your mouth. You observed how people acted when they felt unguarded, what they revealed unintentionally, and what they withheld when they felt seen. You noticed inconsistencies, subtle dismissals, quiet manipulations. You didn't respond because you were gathering understanding, not ammunition. Your silence was a form of wisdom. It offered clarity without confrontation, insight without exposure, knowledge without noise. People only recognized this when you finally spoke. With the certainty of someone who had been mentally present the entire time, your words did not wander. They arrived. They did not speculate. They unveiled, and that realization unsettled them deeply. They saw then that you were never unaware. They had simply misjudged the depth of the person in front of them. Your quiet was never emptiness. It was fullness. It held everything they hoped you would never perceive. Your truth did more than alter the mood. It transformed the atmosphere itself. When you finally spoke, it was not merely language filling the space. It was presence. Honesty carries weight, and the room felt it. Rehearsed behaviors lost their grip. Casual exchanges no longer provided cover. What had been hidden beneath politeness surfaced into awareness. The environment stopped bending to comfort and began responding to authenticity. Your voice held authority not because it demanded attention, but because it carried coherence and conviction. It disrupted the unspoken scripts people had been following unconsciously. In that disruption, energy shifted. The focus moved away from preserving false harmony and toward honoring what is real. For too long, harmony had meant avoidance, suppression, and tolerance of quiet imbalance. Your honesty rendered those rules obsolete. The peace people protected was revealed as fragile, dependent on silence and denial. Once you spoke, truth became the baseline. From that point forward, interactions were no longer about avoiding tension. They were about acknowledging reality, respecting facts, and honoring integrity. The impact extended beyond emotion into the psychological field. Those who relied on subtle control felt the ground change beneath them. They could no longer maneuver quietly or maintain dominance through. They redrew the boundaries of how you would be treated from that moment forward. Authority emerged not because you demanded it, but because you reclaimed what was always yours. Boundaries became firm. Truth became steady. You stood in your identity without seeking permission or approval. Authority is not volume, it is certainty. And your certainty rendered old dynamics unusable. Nothing unsettles those invested in control more than witnessing someone step into a version of themselves that cannot be shaped. They preferred you uncertain, softened, self-questioning. That version made them feel larger. But once you stepped into clarity, awareness and self-respect, every tool they once relied on lost effectiveness. You no longer respond to guilt. You no longer shrink for validation. You no longer grant access without alignment. That terrifies those who depended on your doubt. Now they face someone grounded, clear, and sovereign. Someone they cannot direct. Someone they must acknowledge. Speaking your truth was never just about expression. It was reclamation. Every word dismantled illusion, exposed hidden motives, and restored balance where imbalance once ruled. Your honesty didn't merely unsettle people, it redefined the entire space. It clarified who was real, who was performative, who was aligned, and who was only present by proximity. By choosing truth, you forced clarity. You were no longer seen as manageable or moldable, but as awake, aware, and unshakable. Your silence had been strategy. Your restraint had been power waiting. And your voice didn't just disrupt comfort. It established authority. True courage is not measured by loudness, but by precision and unwavering self-respect. Those who collapse under truth were never meant to remain. Those who rise alongside it are the ones who belong.